the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today we are beaming in from Ann Arbor, a very amazing astrologer who I met somewhere along the way on the interwebs. This is Sam Oakwell. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jen. Great to be here.
So how did we meet? Must have been just kind of some astrological magic web encounter, huh?
Yeah, so I saw your Vesta talk at the first Astromagia. Then I got a consult with you, and then I actually took your Astro Intensive and picked up a lot of great medieval techniques from that. So yeah, that's sort of how we got to know each other.
Yay, I love astrological magic.
Yep.
So how long have you been making love to astrology?
Oh gosh, so I would say it is approaching 6 years. It's like 5-6 years. I first got into it in earnest around 2018. And each year sort of like got deeper into the practice. And the magic has always been a part of it. So like I definitely was writing the Astro Magic current that, still going on obviously, but was starting to get real big at the time.
Yeah, that was almost like a preamble to like what's ended up happening in the recent times.
Yeah.
What was your first astrology book?
So I have a funny answer to this because this is going back to like well before I was actively interested in astrology. So the name of the book is 2012 Crossing the Bridge into the Future. It's by Mark Borax, and I actually found it while kind of like hanging out in half-price books in Berkeley. And you know how bookstores are set up, the metaphysical section is usually right next to the philosophy section. So I kind of, crossed over and was like looking through stuff, and it kind of stuck with me. It's a very strange book, is what I'll say. It's autobiographical. So the author is talking about his apprenticeship to this wizard in the Santa Cruz mountains who is trying to reconstruct ancient Atlantean astrology based on this vision the guy had. And then there are all these like weird tangents also about his, personal romantic life, which isn't going so hot necessarily. And like he's trying to connect that for whatever reason. So very different from the astrology I would end up getting captivated by and practicing. But it was interesting looking back at the book in preparation for this episode. I realized I did take away some things about his approach to astrology. Like he tends to view it as a form of divination and is very much about that sort of thing. He likes to really view the chart as a starting point, not really finish there. So he's not trying to tell people about stuff that's like hard fated or, well, that's just who you are. Sorry. He doesn't really have that sort of fatalistic attitude. And he's trying to leave room for agency. And so I think that even though at the time it was like sort of this fanciful narrative that, because I grew up near the Santa Cruz Mountains, so it reminded me a lot of, adults and people I'd interacted with as a child, because, I was around a lot of those, Santa Cruz hippie types.
I was going to say, yeah, so California, like isn't there a vortex in Santa Cruz? Like you go to this place and it just...
Oh yeah, the mystery spot. Yeah, they have all these like optical illusions and stuff. And they're like, we don't know why it's like that. But yeah, he is very, very plugged in to that. And I think that was part of the appeal. That was part of what really resonated. It was kind of almost a nostalgia for a youth where things felt magical,
Yeah. And so 2012 in the title, is that because he was writing after 2012 or was it anticipatory of that year?
Definitely anticipatory, published in 2008. So the hype was, building. That was around when Daniel Pinchbeck's book came out. And I think that was also part of what led me to pick it up because I remember, sort of as a stoner college student enjoying Pinchbeck's take on some things.
I mean, everybody loves an apocalypse, right? We all love to like imagine there's something ahead. After 9/11, we had 2012 and then, 2020. So
Right. Exactly. What's funny is like with the title, he does say some stuff about 2012 because he's very focused on the harmonic convergence of 87 because of that whole new age stream at the time. And then 2012. And it's like the idea is that's like the period where humanity has to get things together in preparation for what's coming. I don't know if I would actually have given the book that title if I were him writing that book, because 2012 is like a beat in the narrative that he's presenting, but it certainly isn't a book about 2012 in the way that other books, from that time are.
Right, right. And then also this little sliver of Atlantean astrology. It's very similar to like watching Annihilation, when that Portuguese scholar has the book of translating the heptagrams, and it's like, I need the heptagram book.
Yeah.
It's a non-existent book that it's just, gosh.
So, I mean, what's actually funny about that, you bring that up, is like the Atlantean astrology has this like completely different order of the zodiacal signs. I forget exactly what it is, but like Aries is somewhere in the middle. Like it doesn't start with Aries. The signs do not move sequentially. And then the mage, the guy's apprenticing with, Ellias Lonsdale, says, well, I'm not saying that the planets don't actually move through signs the way we see them move through signs. I'm just saying that like the soul moves through signs in this way, right? So it is actually very much like that sort of jumbled language from Arrival and all that stuff.
I love that. I actually was just picking up an Ellias Lonsdale book just now, the Inside Planets book. A lot of others on the show have already been mentioning him.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so backing up, that was your first book. That's quite a bridge to the future. You had no idea what bridge you were about to cross.
No, I didn't. None whatsoever.
But you will be crossing a bridge, because now comes the big question everybody's waiting for. If you were going to be stuck on a desert island, what would be the 3 books you would take with you, assuming you also had an ephemeris in your satchel?
So the first one, as someone who has graduate training in philosophy, I just love my tomes, right? Got to have a good tome to work through. And the astrology one that I've been drawn to the most in like the last couple months has definitely been the translation of Abu Mashar's On the Revolutions of the Years of Nativities by Benjamin Dykes. And this is a book that I have only read the first few chapters because they were just so arresting, and I instantly started trying out the technique. So it is a very comprehensive book. It covers not just solar revolutions, but profections, Fidaria, primary directions, just a wide range of predictive techniques. But just looking at some of his cookbook style stuff for planetary aspects in solar revolutions, so solar returns, I just found all this stuff where it's like, some of it was like eerily predictive when I looked back at past years of my life. Like there was one, for instance, there was something like, if the moon and Venus are configured in this way, the native will incur the Sultan's favor and disappoint his father and lust after foreign women. And that was a year when I got in trouble with the administration of my college for some stuff. I had this like really intense crush on a friend who was living all the way across the country. And then there were some like clashes with my parents about some things, but I just thought it was like really funny. It's like, whoa, how did he get all that from just the moon and Venus being in a not so great house?
Well, the next question is, how did you feel having read something written in, I think it was he was active in the 800s, applying to your life very specifically in the now?
I mean, it was eerie. It was uncanny. It's this really exciting feeling of, like you're really tapping into something. And there was sort of this great power that astrology has had. Right?
Yeah. Did you feel like your feelings were yours, though? I mean, this conflict you had with an administrator, this love that you had for someone far away. And it's like, wait, is that my love? Or is that like, what is that?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I still feel like it was all me, right? I mean, these were all like things that came out of like who I was at the time, what I was doing, and, what I was interested in, that sort of thing. And so where the uncanny part in it is like, okay, well, somehow he has these ways of like seeing that stuff. And it's not entirely obvious, right? It's not like he like does the proverbial math and says, okay, well, and I'm saying this about the Sultan because X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, I'm just going to say this about, incurring the wrath of the Sultan, and it just has to do with the moon and Venus. There it is, right? So it's like this really interesting method of fortune telling, probably based on, not just him, but like a whole tradition of observing correlations and things like that. I mean, that we of course have stretching all the way back to the Babylonian tablets and stuff like that. So
yeah. I was just recently reading an article by Jeffrey Cornelius in the Masha Allah to Kepler volume. targeting around the same time period that Abu Mashar would have been around. And he's talking about this concept of the interpretation of interpretations, like when Abu Mashar says you're going to have an issue with this person and fall in love with that person and then have these little mini conflicts. Jeffrey goes, it's like shooting an arrow at a target. And this is my best aim at getting it right for Sam in the future, right? And then if you're good, you hit the target. But it's not that you're doing it somehow with blind intuition, like there's rules that follow. So, there's this angle from this planet to this planet, and then all of these kinds of inductive reasoning take place. And a word, I had to learn the word is stochastic. That's a good philosophy word.
Stochastic, yeah.
Stochastic, right? And then Dorian Greenbaum, she's another amazing scholar of the history of astrology. She talks about a divinatory stochastic, that you're just kind of like shooting off this arrow into a target. And if you make it, then you have that eerie experience that you did. And if you don't, then people go, you study more, pay more attention to more charts, become a better astrologer, finish reading Abu Mashar.
Yeah.
But that image of someone shooting an arrow into a target, and then that becomes like the accurate prediction. And you can have many arrows hit the target from different directions, which then counts for other testimonies that would lead to that same interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, that is like something he emphasizes is, you can feel more confident in saying, no, this will definitely happen when you get more testimonies from different sources and you see it like portrayed in a number of different ways. And, that has definitely held true with the predictive astrology I have done.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I mean, you'll have a lot of time to finish the rest of those chapters. Are you working from Ben Dykes' translation from the Latin manuscript or the newer one from the Arabic manuscript?
Yeah, I think it's the newer one from the Arabic. It's, I believe in a recent episode, Bear River called it the Green Bible, but very apt name. Yeah.
I don't know if I'd call it a Bible when it's coming out of that part of the world, but yeah, very cool. All right. So what's the second book that you're bringing with you on this desert island?
So for my second book, I would pick the recent edited volume that Austin Coppock and Daniel A. Schultz brought out called The Celestial Art, which I believe is perhaps the first edited volume on astrological magic to exist ever. But I think it's actually really great just as a book on astrological magic in its own right, just because it has so many amazing essays from great sources covering such a big variety of traditions and approaches. And I wanted to pick this book over, devoted grimoires that have come up on the show previously, like, Agrippa, Picatrix, Ficino, that sort of thing, because it just really has a good rough guide to a number of things, a number of great templates, a number of ways to like think about ritual. And I think that it would be good to have just because I would have like more flexibility to kind of switch approaches depending on what I needed to do and what was working or not working. But also, I don't know, in terms of approaches to astro magic, the more the merrier in terms of influence. Like, I really think that just drawing from a large variety of sources and synthesizing them is how one gets to stuff that's one's unique practice. You could say that this book leaves room for you to kind of then do your thing or tie it into other stuff you're doing or customize it in a certain way. And so I actually really like that about the work in general.
So when you encountered it the first time, what were some of the new directions that it pushed you in or introduced you to?
It definitely really clarified for me a lot about approaches to planetary rituals and how to think about that, because we have like Dykes' chapter on the Huronian Sabians, right? And he actually includes a lot of his translation of, manuscripts that they produced, which is, I think, highly valuable, again, in its own right, as a sort of rough guide to like, okay, here is how to think about work with the classical planets. In addition, there were a number of chapters that like cover the historical context of these sorts of things and the worldviews involved. And there was actually one by, I believe, John Michael Greer that pointed to C.S. Lewis's book, The Discarded Image, which I just love. I just really adore that book because it's a good way of getting you into the mindset of the classical astro magicians and also classical astrologers, really, and what they saw when they looked up, what they were encountering, what the world felt like and looked like to them, and sort of the, phenomenology of living in that world. And I think that just capturing that or tapping into it, it is, for me at least, like very crucial to any sort of, astrological magic ritual, right? It's just kind of, living in that world a little.
Right. Yeah. So you said this word phenomenology. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, so that's actually something that I studied more formally. It's a discipline of philosophy formulated by Edmund Husserl at the beginning of the 20th century that focuses on sort of immediate experience, conscious experience, how one relates to people and objects in the world, and that sort of thing. And is actually, a lot of people will talk about lived experience and embodiment, but these are actually terms of art in phenomenology, right? And so even though I'm, no longer in the philosophy world, phenomenology has been something I've carried with me as like an approach to things that I think really continues to open doors, especially, with things like astrology, where when I look at a chart, for instance, I think a lot about like, how does the chart feel? What is the like sensation of the chart? Where's the pull? Where am I being directed in the chart? And that is a whole approach to things that I think my phenomenological background really did assist with.
And was Husserl coming at this early 20th century? Is there like a date of some kind or sort of a milieu he was in?
Well, his first major work, Logical Investigations, comes out in, I believe, 2 volumes, 1900, 1901.
Okay.
So it's like literally the very, very beginning of the 20th century.
Cool. Lived experience seems to be one of the major trends happening in astrology right now, with the Uranus North Node conjunction in Taurus and this move and almost explosion of astrological magic since the celestial art was published. And now we have Astromagia, which is getting our pinballs to connect in the game. And it just seems like this lived experience is becoming the focus of how we do astrology now.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, for me, that's really exciting. And I think honestly, when I look at that as like a predominant trend that's emerging like that, and also sort of animist approaches to astrology, things of that nature, it makes sense that I would have like entered at the time I did. And it's kind of cool because it's almost like I get to continue doing the work I started, in academia, but do it in a different context and with arguably more depth, more oomph to it,
Yeah.
So that's something that I've actually been really enjoying. Yeah, especially with like the last Astromagia, the focus was specifically on astral sensibilities, right? And so again, we have this focus on that sort of thing.
Yeah, the texture, the touch, and the direct experience, I would say. But it relies on that other kind of experience, which can be defined as more of a wisdom tradition or kind of the maxims or these aphorisms that you get from something like Abu Mashar passed down through the ages. But you kind of need to zipper both together, right? Like there has to be some kind of application plus apprehension and then see what happens and then add that to your toolkit and then see what happens next. Inductive reasoning, I guess that could be, right?
Yeah, no, totally.
Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show. So, book number 3.
So the previous conversation is an excellent segue to this because the book that I'm picking is not by any means technically an astrology book, but it is a book that I think folks interested in these currents in astrology and astrological magic would really enjoy checking out and benefit from looking at. And it's the Phenomenology of Perception by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. So he's a French phenomenologist. The book comes out in 1945, I believe. And it is arguably my favorite philosophy book. It would be a very strong contender for that title. And it's just incredible because he synthesizes all kinds of approaches. So he's standing in the phenomenological tradition. So he is, saying quite a lot about Husserl and Heidegger and other main thinkers in that line of thought. But he also makes efforts to incorporate dialectics. So like Hegel, Marx, that sort of thing. Psychology, both of the psychoanalysis kind and the behaviorist kind. What I guess you could call proto-neuroscience, sort of as the field was starting to develop. So he talks a lot about like experiments with split brain patients and that sort of thing, and how the phenomenology works for them, and also anthropology. And the writing, it can be very dense at times, of course, because it's one of those, bulky philosophy tomes, right? But the writing can be just stunningly beautiful at times. And also like there are certain passages where I suspect he might have, had some sort of spiritual thing going on, because, the way he talks about, ritual or these spiritual almost experiences of being in the world, or mescaline, things of that nature, really kind of point to, okay, well, there's more going on. Like, this isn't just like some sort of clinical science book about like, okay, we're going to talk about experience and, what are the neural correlates of consciousness, and we're done. He's not going to stop there. And I think he actually leaves a lot of room for magical approaches, and I think would be a really helpful source for people thinking more about embodiment, lived experience, and that sort of thing, because his whole thesis is the body and our experience of the body determines so much, arguably just about everything. It all comes down to this, feeling of being in the body.
Wow. And the body is ultimately also then the end manifestation of what we see in a chart.
Yeah, right.
We have our birth in a body, which gets a natal chart, and then we truck along through life.
Yeah, well, and what I actually really love about that way of putting it is a chart has the same thing a body has of being both internal and external, right? It's like this object to the astrologer, but we all have our chart, which can get to more inner things about us, right? And that's sort of the whole magic of it. With the right training and acumen and that sort of thing, you can look at a chart and see into someone, or see into a situation, or see into dynamics. There's a lot that you can kind of see into through this externalized layer, right? And so there is actually definitely a similarity between a chart and a body in that sense.
That's making me think of the math that one would do in our harmonic way, that it's like surgery in the chart somehow. Like, and you bend the chart into like a 90-degree wheel or take it into a harmonic. It's like, that's just so surgical in this sense of like surgery on the soul, like what matches up with what in this system over here, like your foot to your ear, like, this kind of bending things in a way that wouldn't normally be how we are apprehending ourselves, but you could go there, right? All of these blood panel tests that you get, and ways that doctors try to analyze the chemical or material data of the body, and the astrologers are over here like, oh, look at that arc between those two planets,
Right. Well, and then that, of course, that whole surgery on the soul thing, that's arguably what we do when we do remediation. It is sort of this way of operating on oneself, or looking at, what the chart is pointing to as, more foundational issues. And then that also kind of can open the door for mundane approaches. All of my best, ritual work has always ended up in something mundane that doesn't like sound or seem on the face of it magical, but like that's what actually helps. But it's like this whole way of getting at that and getting that information, and you're sort of like using the symbols of the chart, the symbols of the stars, the planets, all that stuff to kind of get at, how do I then go about my life on Earth? How do I bring this back to the ground, so to speak, and move forward, given all that.
Yeah. And also then thinking about the remediation is like the planet that needs help is like, oh, you sad organ, let's help you, let's fortify you in some fashion, or let's excise you in some fashion, and like take it to the next level. And then I think about temperament, where It's like, it's okay to be who you are too. Like, there's nothing wrong with your chart. There's nothing wrong with that planet that seems deficient. It's spelling out these difficulties. And when you know that's your bag, then you work on the bag. But it's not any kind of like causal thing. It's more of just like, oh, I got into the river at this point and there's a lot of these things around me that I got to deal with, as opposed to I got into the river when it was, cleaner or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. In meeting with someone and reading their chart, I would never want them to walk away feeling like they were doomed or anything was inexorable. Because, I mean, look, like I'm just telling you, as like someone with, I mean, out of the charts I've seen, I've got probably one of the more afflicted planets out of like any chart, right? Like my moon is really not in great shape, but like it's not like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm like doomed to failure in lunar stuff, everything the moon represents, because we've got all these, accidental afflictions, happening, right? It's more like, as you said, this is where we enter the stream, but we don't have to stay there. We can kind of move around, we can get out, we can rearrange some things, and we can also, like, there are ways to sort of, hack a chart so that you get like stuff that has the same symbolism, but is arguably less bad. Because the symbolism of astrology, I feel, is like, it's never a one-to-one correspondence, right? It's not like you're writing computer code and, it'll execute the same way every time.
But that's what people think who don't know how to do it. That's the thing, is that they think
Right.
It's this kind of prescriptive, oh, A to Z, but really, like, that's what I was getting at with Jeffrey Cornelius, is that it's more of like a informed shooting of an arrow with and if you practice and you train and you see a lot of charts and you talk to a lot of people and you read a lot of books, you listen to all the episodes of Within Orb, you're really, really good at shooting your target. And it's not about sort of this psychic insight, intuitive, rulelessness or, chaotic, unlogical thing. It's more of this paying attention that I see you bringing up with phenomenology of perception.
Right. And it is really cool how it works, because it's almost like you're kind of like going away, you're going this path, you like turn away, you go down the logical path, right? And you follow all the sometimes very strict rules and ways of looking at a chart, and then you somehow do the synthesis and you shoot your arrow, as you put it, right? And then that's when the magic happens. But you have to go through that process of like, okay, I'm walking away. Like, it's interesting because when I was, first starting to do readings, I got a few people who were like treating me like I was doing this more intuitive thing. And while I would say what I do is divination, it isn't the same kind of divination as, oh, I'm reaching back and I'm feeling this thing coming through. I mean, that can maybe happen like sometimes, it's much weaker than like I just methodically go through the chart and look at it and synthesize and make a judgment as to what the chart is trying to say or trying to speak to in that moment. And then that's where it is, right? It's not like I'm like psychically reaching for anything. It's like it finds me through that process.
Right. Yeah. I'm thinking of something Andy Geertz said once upon a time at the Portland School of Astrology a couple years ago, which was that in the Hellenistic model, your chart is unfolding into the shape that you're supposed to take. The directionality of that isn't like, oh, the acorn becomes an oak tree. It's more like the oak tree is always there. And the limit of time makes you have to get there slowly, but you're being pulled into that shape to get to that point. The branches may be here or there, the leaves may be here or there, but really, like, in the end, there's kind of this overarching form, like you were saying, how does the chart feel? You also said earlier something about seeing, and then the chart just speaking. So portend, that word is to foretell, but it's like a pulling forward and a stretching.
Mm-hmm.
Like the root of that word is to stretch forth into the future, right? Which is a really cool thought form in a way, like, but the sight, you're talking about phenomenology, and then people will say, how did you know that? Like, what's that experience like for you when someone says, like, you see something in the chart and then someone comes to you and they're like, how did you know that? What's your experience of that sight? Because for me, it's opaque. I don't see things.
Right.
I just can read,
I would agree 1000% with that sentiment, because like, yeah, for me, when I get that kind of response, so it is opaque and it's not me who's seeing it. It's that something is coming through and I am the vessel it is coming through by me doing my thing and, feeling out the chart and trying to synthesize and going through the like technical dignity stuff with the chart, or maybe looking at some timing techniques. And then I will get this sort of sense of, okay, this is maybe where it's at, right? But like, that's not me knowing things, right? Because like if I know something, it's like there in my mind, it's accessible to me and I'm thinking about it. But it's not like, I don't know, I see a client, I'm like, yes, I'm going to tell you exactly about all the weird dream stuff that happens to you, for instance, right? It's more like I see a lot of 12th house stuff and maybe I will suggest that.
Yeah. Like you said earlier too, like you're looking at the feel of the chart and where are you being pulled? Well, that pull is a portension, right? It's portending this,
right?
Like, okay, 12th house is wanting to speak, and then you break out your toolkit of 12th house words. And the idea that the person on the other end is just sitting there, it's like, no, you have to put some energy into it and show me how this is initially showing up for you so I can calibrate. No one would go to a professional in any other category and show up and just be like, okay, operate my money. Okay, treat my body without testing anything.
Totally. And that I like actually to like complete the circle, that's, something from very early in Abu Mashar. He says, read for the person in front of you. Don't make predictions for a pauper that you would make for royalty. Don't make predictions you would make for royalty that you would make for someone who isn't that. What I like seeing in him is this focus of, okay, well, you are always reading for a person though. And so whatever you do, make what you're saying make sense to that person and get across things in a certain way that that person will understand. And so that's, I think, a big part of doing a successful reading, really.
So speaking of getting people to understand, what are some of the books you would recommend for people just getting into astrology?
Great question. So I will start this with the caveat that I am generally a high level beginner type person. So it's hard for me to begin with like very, super introductory things. Like I really like the feeling of being intellectually pushed and challenged, right? And so for that reason, if we want to talk about what was my first astrology book in 2018, the answer would be Hellenistic Astrology by Chris Brennan. And I still get a lot of value out of it. I think it's a really great intro book. So it covers all the fundamentals of astrology, gets into a few more advanced techniques, and presents it in a way that's sort of like in academia, we would say the educated layperson would, really understand it. And so it was a way for me to kind of shore up my understanding of key astrological concepts, but not feel like, I was being condescended to in any way, right? It was like, actually, it is a joy to kind of intellectually work through that book still. And so that is the first thing that comes to mind. I would also throw in, since it is a text of some sort, transcripts from his podcast, the Astrology Podcast. I really like that he's done such a good job with having the transcripts there, and you can like search them for phrases on the website. So you don't have to listen to the whole 4-hour episode if you don't want to, or you don't have the time, I really do see a lot of that work as making that information as accessible as possible. So that's definitely a good intro text, I would say, if you're looking for that kind of experience.
So 6 years later, when someone's done with all of that, where would you point them next?
Yeah,
that's a lot of material. That's like not a shortage of any reading.
Oh no, yeah, you're going to be going for a while. You just on that book and the transcripts, right? But like, well, so another book that I would recommend is published fairly recently, I think 2020. It's A Scheme of Heaven by Alexander Boxer. So it's a fairly comprehensive history of astrology, not dissimilar to what Nick Campion has done in his much longer, more academic, like 2-volume work, but it's like sort of condensed and aimed specifically at the theme of like astrology as data and finding meaning in data, and this almost humanistic quest to look at data, look at calculative methods, and find some sort of meaning in there that is deeper, that we still do, right? Even if we're looking at, opinion polls or all kinds of things. I mean, that's arguably a lot of the underlying thought behind AI, right? Is that you can make machines, quote unquote, understand certain things by just giving them data and, sort of correcting them as they're getting more or less close to finding the meaning in the data. What I like about that book is it provides that perspective, because I think a lot of folks who get into astrology, they're going at it from just a spiritual perspective or just a magical one or something. But I think of astrology also as like one of the greatest and oldest data collection enterprises humanity has engaged in. That's a really wonderful lens to think about astrology, because it kind of is. And it also, the book really drives home how inextricable astrology in the West was from science, basically, and philosophy for thousands of years, which again, that's something that, gets lost today. That's a point that people forget about or want to forget about. But I actually like that the book is written in such a way that a non-astrologer could read it and find it fascinating, but would kind of poke at them in some like kind of nice, provocative sort of ways to be like, okay, well, wait. So this was really clearly a thing. So all the like, oh, sun signs are just dumb dismissals. But like, that's not what was actually happening. So
right. He's like putting it right in the pain point of, oh, you value data, hard sciences? Check this out.
Yeah, totally. And actually, so another book I will mention that kind of relates to this sort of connection between data and meaning and magic and that sort of thing, that's more of a philosophy book. But again, I think astrologers and magicians would really benefit from reading it, is Technic and Magic by Federico Campagna. It's a bit more of a philosophy book. So it's not really like a strict astrology book. I think people who are interested in occult matters would find a lot of value there, just because it does touch on the history of occultism, specifically through medieval Arabia and Persia. So the context in which Abu Mashar is writing, right? But I think the book does a really great job of like showing, okay, what is the technological worldview that we are living in? And what is the magical worldview that we want to preserve for ourselves? What is the way we want to engage with the world versus the way that the larger populace has decided to do so in this time? So that would be sort of like, as a side note, another book, kind of like A Scheme of Heaven, that would be a bit more philosophical and touch on a lot of those themes from maybe a different angle.
That's almost a double-edged sword in a way, because you're saying that and I'm going, wait, but I want to read that. And I'm like doing this for 25 years, but that seems like it would give an edge to the way that one could see things and its possible manifestations.
Yeah, no, totally. Like, I think so, because again, like living in the world we do, I think we need to understand the deeper philosophical currents that we are embedded in. And I think that also, as part of being a practitioner of astrology, magic, that sort of thing, it's important to understand, okay, like, what are the philosophical fundamentals of the worldview one commits to when one accepts these sorts of practices, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I think, a value.
Very cool. Well, I value the time you've spent with me here today and sharing all of your insights with everyone. And you've given us a really great reading list to chase down. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. Where can people find you, Sam?
So I'm in the process of launching my website. It will be, I think, up by the time this episode airs. And you can find me at oakwellastrology.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, well, you have a lovely day, and everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in, and we always appreciate your support of the CAELi Institute, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Jen. Great talking.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at caeli.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice. Rate it 5 stars or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.